Hello everyone, welcome to video number 8 of AP Computer Science A. The topics that will be covered in this video, which are inheritance and polymorphism, have to do with having several classes and having one class inherit another class. So we're going to be making two classes, parent and child, and we'll have child inherit parent. So starting off with the parent class, we're going to be having two private variables, which store the name and the age of the parent. Now we're going to be making the constructor. And now let's make the child class. So in order to make a class inherit another class, you use the keyword extends. So in this case, you say class child extends parent. So when a class inherits another class, it gets everything inside of that class except for private methods and constructors. So in this case, since child has inherited parent, that means that it also has the variables parent name and parent age. And now let's make two additional variables. So we're going to make the same thing except for the child. And now let's make the constructor. So since we have four variables now, two of which were inherited from the parent class, we need to have four parameters in the constructor. So you can set the values for parent name and parent age by using a super constructor. So that's basically this constructor right over here. Super constructor basically means the constructor from the super class. So to do that, you use the keyword super, and then you pass the parameters. So as you can see, we need a string and an int for the super constructor. So we just pass these two. And what this does is it uses this constructor right here to set the values for parent name and parent age. And now let's also make sure that we set the values for child name and child age. All right, so now we've created two classes. And now let's create an object. And I'm going to make this object a child. So now the constructor. So I'm going to give the parent the name Morgan and 40 as the age. And then the child's name will be Peter with an age of 10. All right, so parent name and parent age are both private variables. However, we've just created a child object which has both of those variables. And what that means is that private variables in a superclass are inherited by the subclass. But the caveat is that they cannot be accessed inside of the subclass. So if we were to create a method in child, we're going to make it return a string and call it getName. And if we wanted it to return parent name, it doesn't work. As you can see, it's highlighted in red, and it says the field parent.parent name is not visible. So private variables are inherited, but they cannot be accessed inside of the subclass. If we wanted to make a getter for this variable, we're going to have to put it inside of the superclass. And now I'm gonna go back to the main class and I'm gonna print out a.getName. So getName is a public method inside of the superclass, and since the subclass inherits the superclass, it also has that method. So therefore, doing a.getName should have no problems, and it should print out Morgan. And indeed, it does. So now we're getting into polymorphism, which is having a method with several forms. That's basically the meaning of the word polymorphism. Poly means many, morph means form. So let's go to the child class. And right now we have a method inside of the parent class called getName. And I'm gonna make a method in the child class. It's also gonna be called getName, and it's also gonna have the same parameters, which is no parameters. And I'm gonna make it say return child name. All right, so this method overrides the super method. So if you had a parent object, so let's say parent b equals new parent and then the parameters, then if you were to call getName on that, it would return the parent name. But right now, since you have getName inside of the child class, it overrides that method and it will return the child name. So if we run this now, it should print out Peter because that's the name of the child. And indeed, it does. And one common thing that you'll see when using polymorphism is this. So you'll have the name of the superclass, and then the name of the object equals new, and then the name of the subclass, and then the constructor. So what this does is it makes this object a parent during compiling and a child when it's running. So since it's still a child when it's running, it will still print out Peter. But what happens by making it a parent when it's compiling is, so compiling is basically the program reading over your code to make sure there are no errors. So what it does is it treats A as a parent, so it looks inside of the parent class to verify that there is a method called getName. So if we were to remove this, then you see a.getName is highlighted in red, so it doesn't work, even though there is a method in the child class called getName. But if we were to turn this back into a child, then it would work. All right, so now I'm gonna place the method back inside of the parent class. All right, so now we're getting into using super methods. So if we wanted to use the method getName from the superclass parent, then we would type super dot the name of the method. So let's make a new method inside of the child class. We're gonna call it getInfo, and it's going to print out the name of both the parent and the child. So return, so we're gonna say parent name, colon, space, and then plus. So to use the method from the superclass, we type super.getName. All right, and then let's indent. So to do that, we type \n, child name, colon, space, and the variable child name. So now if we were to print out a.getInfo, it prints out this. All right, so now the final topic will be the types of inheritance. So we've just created a single inheritance program, and what that means is having one class inherit another. And there's also multi-level that's having more than 2 classes. So you can have one class inherit another, and then the subclass being inherited by another subclass. So we can actually do that by creating a new class called grandchild, and that class inheriting child. But to save time, we're not going to do that in this video. All right, and then another type of inheritance is hierarchical. So what that means is having one class being inherited by multiple classes. So in this case, we could have another class, maybe siblings, also extend parent. And then the fourth type of inheritance is multiple. And Java doesn't support that, but it's basically having one class inherit several classes. And you can only use multiple inheritance in Java when dealing with interfaces. And we're going to learn about interfaces in the next video. The rest of this video is practice. In the description, there's a link labeled Practice MCQ. I would suggest clicking on it. It will lead to a Google Slides with 3 multiple choice questions, and I suggest you give them a try. So pause the video here if you want to try them. The solution to problem 1 will come in 3, 2, 1. All right, so we have an object, and we only care about what type of object it is during runtime, because runtime is what determines what's printed out. So we see that this object is a grad student object during runtime. So we're going to print out a.favorite color. So we need to determine what this function returns. So we come here, and this problem was trying to trap you. You may have answered E, but the answer is actually D, because right here it says return red, and all that we care about is what is returned. So therefore D is the answer. This line right over here does not matter. Now if the return statement was instead return super.favoriteColor plus red, then the answer will be E. But since that's not part of the return statement, the answer is just red. So this is one thing that you'll have to be careful on if you're doing the AP exam. There will be problems that try to trap you. They make you think the answer is something, but it's actually something else. Now moving on to problem 2. So we have an object that is a child object during runtime. So we call a.m1. So that's this method right over here. So we call super.m1. And remember that whenever a block of code calls a method, that block of code pauses until the method is complete. So this line of code this block of code right here pauses, and then we go to this method right over here. So we first print out P1, and then we go to M2. Now this is where the problem gets difficult. Which method does M2 correspond to? This one or this one? The answer is this one, because remember what object you're acting this method on, A, and A is a child. So therefore, M2 would correspond to this method right over here. If A was a parent, then we would run this method right over here. All right, but anyway, we run M2, so we come to here, and this code right here says super.m2. So we come here and we print out P2. All right, and now this has finished. So therefore we can continue to this line. So now we print out C2, and now M1 has finished. So we print out C1. So overall we printed out P1, P2, C2, C1, which is A. Problem 3 is asking which of the following constructors are valid. So first of all, constructor 2, it takes an int as a parameter, and then it calls super of that int. So right here we see 2 constructors. So if you remember constructor overloading, which one is selected depends on the parameters. So right now we have super of an int. So therefore this constructor right over here is called, and that's totally valid. And the same reasoning would apply to number 3. So we have a string and we're calling the constructor on a string. So we run this constructor right over here, and that's totally valid. Now what about number 1? That would not be valid because you have to call a superconstructor. If you don't call a superconstructor, that would only work if there is a default constructor in C1. So since we don't have the superconstructor here in 1, then it would try to call super of no parameters. And that would only work if we had a constructor here with no parameters, or if we had no constructors at all, and that would just mean that we can use the default constructor, which has no parameters. But since we have 2 constructors here and both of them have parameters, that means that we cannot use super of no parameters, and therefore 1 does not work. So the answer to this question is C. And now we're done. Today may have seemed like a lot of content, but the most important things to remember are what is inheritance, how to use polymorphism, superconstructors, and super methods. If inheritance seems like a difficult topic to you, then I would suggest searching up practice problems on the internet. And if you're ever confused about anything, you can always ask in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in video number 9.